rules of the game are changing. Goodbye PSR, welcome SCR. Hello everybody, welcome back to me, Fontainer. A big shift in the way the Premier League is going to be managed in terms of finances. On the 21st of November, all of the Premier League clubs were in London to speak about a rule change regarding the finances in terms of how the Premier League is run and or managed financially. Number one was squad cost ratio. Number two is SSR, which is sustainability and systemic resilience. We're not going to talk about that. Number three was TBA, or top to bottom anchoring, which didn't get voted through. It's highly controversial and kind of implies salary caps. Just bear with me. There's a lot to go through. The rules of the game have changed. But the important thing to realize is that PSR is no longer going to be a thing from the 26-27 season. That is next season in the Premier League. It's been highly controversial. There's been a lot of controversy about PSR, a lot of speak about it, especially with my club Newcastle, and how it potentially doesn't enable them to grow as a football club. Do we think the new squad cost ratio, or SCR, means that Newcastle will be able to spend more money? Well, let's have a look at how it works, just very basically, and then we can make our minds up after that. The squad cost ratio was voted in by all Premier League clubs, but not all Premier League clubs actually voted for it. Within the Premier League, you need 14 clubs to vote for something so that it can actually go through and be passed. On the specific topic of squad cost ratio, 6 clubs actually voted against it, and that was Bournemouth, Brighton, Brentford, Crystal Palace, Fulham and Leeds. Let's break it down. What is squad cost ratio? How does it work? And how's it going to affect Newcastle? So let's get into it. Let's break down how we calculate a club's squad cost ratio, or SCR. First and foremost, we need two numbers. We need the squad cost, and we need to divide that by the adjusted revenue. So what goes into squad costs? 3 things. Number one, the wages and the salaries of the players and the head coach and manager. Number 2, the amortized transfer payments. Now, we know, and you'll see in previous videos, the amortized transfer payments is what a club has spent and bought a player in. So for example, if we bought Anthony Elanga for 50 million and we spread that cost over 5 years, the amortized transfer fee for Anthony Elanga in a year would be £10 million each year for 5 years. And the third one is agent and intermediary fees, and that is commissions paid to players' representatives. All those 3 things will make up the squad costs. Excluded from the squad cost are things like women's teams, youth academies, community projects, and generally excluded from that calculation. So far, we believe that things like funding a new stadium or training ground, again, will be excluded. The next thing we need to figure out is the revenue. Now, what goes into revenue? Primarily, it is broadcasting deals, it is income from the match day, and then obviously commercial sponsorships. We'll talk about commercial sponsorships in a minute. And the next thing in terms of revenue is profit and or loss from player sales. This is slightly different with UEFA, where they average it over a 3-year period, but we'll see in a second that UEFA's squad cost ratio is different to the Premier League's. So the Premier League have set a maximum allowable percentage of SCR at 85%. So a club's squad cost ratio needs to be 85% so that you don't start getting hit with fines or points deductions. All clubs that are participating in UEFA competitions, that is all 3 competitions, the Champions League, the Europa League and the Conference League, has already set a squad cost ratio of 70%. All clubs participating in Europe need to comply with 70%, so you would think that they will be used to this model already. And again, failing to comply with those ratios means financial fines or possibly being kicked out of the competition. It does get slightly more complicated where the Premier League has set a luxury tax where you may be able to have a higher percentage than the 85%. It does get slightly more complicated, and there's things like red and green thresholds, which I'm not going to cover in this video. The important thing we needed to understand was the squad cost ratios are in. How does the calculation work? Are Newcastle compliant? Are we cutting close to the bone? Or do we have some wiggle room already to be able to spend more on player transfers or to give our existing players higher wages to keep the real stars at the club? If you look at Newcastle's financial results and figures over the last couple of years, Newcastle's revenue has grown steadily since PAF have taken over. The last financial accounts that we have released from the club were the 23-24 season, where the club posted total revenue of £320 million. How did they obtain the 320 million? Well, 184 in broadcast revenue, 86 million in commercial, and then match day revenue at £50 million. So that's given Newcastle their revenue of £320 million. But like any company in the world, the most money a company has to spend is towards its employees. And Newcastle is no different. We've paid £218.7 million in wages and salaries. We have £68 million in other operating expenses. And our player amortization for 23-24 was £96.7 million. Again, that is money that we owe other clubs for players that we've bought and we are paying off on our books over the length of their contract. You don't have to be a finance person to understand these numbers. The key number that Newcastle's accountants have shared with us is that the wages to revenue is at 68.3%. So that means that we are compliant not only with the Premier League, whose SCR threshold is 85%, but also with UEFA, whose threshold is 70%. Now, in layman's terms, what does this mean for Newcastle? Does this mean that we are fine and dandy, or does this mean that we are stuck? To be honest, it kind of means we're exactly where we were, because we are not allowed to randomly just go and spend the way that Chelsea and Man City did back in the day. We are still being bound and forced to operate in a financial world to keep it a fair playing ground for most clubs. The interesting thing, and this is no different to PSR, is that if you have a higher revenue, it means that you can spend more on players and you can give your players higher wages. That is no different to the way that PSR used to work. The only way Newcastle will be able to spend ridiculous sums of money in the transfer window and start offering their players 200, 250, 300 grand a week is if they start increasing their revenue. And let's not forget, revenue is done in three ways. It is match day revenue, broadcast revenue, and the commercial revenue. Now, commercial revenue is slightly within your control. It is kind of linked to success. It might be one of the reasons why Peter Silverstone was let go by Newcastle at the beginning of November. David Hopkinson, the new CEO, was doing his 100-day review of the club. As a result, Peter Silverstone has left Newcastle. Let's not forget he was responsible for getting the Adidas deal to Newcastle, which was worth circa £40 million a year. And his most recent signing was an agreement with Visa as well for the club. But that obviously wasn't enough. There is talk that we are looking to increase the actual revenue way above the £100 million mark. We were at 86.4 million 2 seasons ago. We expect the 24-25 annual accounts to come out in March next year. That'll be interesting to see how Newcastle performed. Let's not forget, we weren't in any European competition last year, so that's going to massively affect the broadcast money coming in. But we did go on and win the Carabao Cup. Although there's not massive financial benefits for it, commercially that would have helped the club attract bigger deals. The interesting thing to factor in as well is that 70% UEFA and 85% Premier League squad cost ratio percentage that clubs need to comply with. What it generally seems to imply is that if you're a Premier League club performing really well and getting into Europe in the top 6-7 positions, you are being bound by tighter financial regulations in terms of having to comply with 70% squad cost ratio. It then implies that the clubs that can comply with the 85% squad cost ratio can spend a little bit more and don't need as much revenue so that they can kind of catch up. The big difference here is that if you have the big clubs who are on massive revenue, and let's take a look at the table very quickly. Man City are a country mile in terms of their revenue. Again, this relates to the 2023-2024 season at £719 million revenue. Therefore, they could afford to pay Kevin De Bruyne 400 grand a week, and the likes of Erling Haaland, who are reportedly on almost £500,000 a week, 500k a week. Man United, we know they've been struggling over the last couple of years, but in terms of revenue generation, they are still miles ahead of, they are still way up there in terms of second position, £662 million. Liverpool and Arsenal, the traditional top big four, completing the list. And then comes Tottenham and Chelsea, which complete the top 6 list. And then come Newcastle and Aston Villa, who are generally the clubs trying to break into their top 6 at 320 million and 272 million pounds revenue per year. One of the interesting things that the Premier League have done is they've implemented a form of shadow SCR this year. All of the clubs agree to it, and it's basically they've applied the principles to see what it would be like if we were operating in this model this year. And at the moment, there's only 1 or 2 clubs which would fall foul of the 85% threshold. It is a little bit of a bugger in terms of Alexander Isak's money coming into the club this year. That would have been fantastic if Newcastle could have used that £135 million in the squad cost ratio calculation for this year, but it doesn't really matter because the rules are only coming in from next year. In summary, my view is that Newcastle are exactly where they used to be. I think the club knew that these rules were coming in, which is why they spent quite heavily on the money which Alexander Isak's sale brought in on the likes of Voltemade, Chow, Elanga and Ramsey. I don't think PSR going and SCR coming in is going to change the way we can spend. The only way we can really spend is if we increase our revenue. If I think of one word which Newcastle could use to try and drive themselves into a better position in terms of SCR, the only word I think of is success. Success on the pitch, success in the transfer market, success in the boardroom, success within the coaching staff, success within the youth team development. But more importantly, the only thing which is really in your hands that I think we can affect directly is the commercial success and also the match day success. Now, how can we increase match day success? Build a new stadium. It's the only way we can. We know that nothing can happen to St James's Park until 2028, but that doesn't mean that plans can't start and construction and feasibility studies and engagement with people, staff, fans, stakeholders can't start now. Construction generally takes about 5 to 6 years anyway. If it's at a new site, there's no reason why we can't have a construction site right next to St James's Park starting in the next year or so, whilst UEFA 2028 is going on at St James's Park. Let's pull our finger out and get cracking on the new stadium. We need to hear some news. We think it's going to be coming at the beginning of 2026. We wait with bated breath. I want to finish with one last thing, and if you've watched my video before, I have a massive pet peeve, and the pet peeve is growing and growing by the day. So on Newcastle's official website, if you look at it, as I've said in previous videos, it says a lot about what the club are doing behind the scenes. So on the senior leadership tab, if you look at it, they've eventually updated and changed the image. It's not Darren Eales anymore. It's now the club's new CEO, David Hopkinson. But if you read the text, it says our senior leadership team, led by Darren Eales, work with the board and our owners, blah, blah, blah. So you've updated the picture to David Hopkinson, but no one's updated the text. Is there something behind the scenes in terms of Darren Eales still holding the position? Or why can the communications department not update the text? Please, Newcastle, pay attention to detail. It's the finer details which are going to make sure that we can progress as a club. If you think this is minutiae detail, don't worry about it, then let me know in the comments and I'll not mention it again. But yeah, but thanks for listening. Hopefully the new SCR squad cost ratio method and model makes a lot of sense. If you want me to go into more detail in terms of reds and green thresholds and luxury tax, please let me know in the comments and I can go and do another video about it. But until then, don't forget,